All right. Well, as we're getting started here, I'd like to thank everybody for joining. And this is Troy Tucker with Blue Sky Business Resources, and I'm the CEO founder. Blue Sky Business Resources is a lower middle market M&A advisory consulting firm. And that's all the time I'm going to take. I'd like to turn this webinar over to Jeremy Housekeeper, who's going to run the meeting. And please, if you want to ask any questions, use the chat function and or the Q&A. Either way, we'll be monitoring both, and we'll get those questions answered for you as promptly as we can. Thank you. Jeremy?
Hey, thanks, Troy. Well, first of all, thanks to Blue Sky Advisors for inviting Greg and I in the South Valley Chamber to moderate. Especially grateful for them inviting us to moderate after salons and barbershops have opened. We're really grateful for that. So thank you, Troy, for that good timing. Cliff, you're looking good. Blake, you need some work. Dave, you're looking all right also. We're excited. The outlook of real estate in general is basically helps us look at the tea leaves moving forward for all the economy. So we're grateful to have all these experts on. We're going to run through real quick the panelists, if they'll just take a quick second and introduce themselves from their company and why they're an expert. And we'll just start with David Bauman.
Thanks, Jeremy. Happy to be here. Dave Bauman, I'm with CBRE, which is a commercial real estate firm. I'm in our Salt Lake City office downtown. We focus on global transactions for corporate clients.
Thank you. Blake and then Matt.
Sure, happy to. Blake Bauman. I'm with the law firm of Ray Quinney and Nebaker in Salt Lake City. I am the chair of our firm's real estate section, and that gives me lots of exposure to issues that are currently impacting landlords and tenants and borrowers and lenders at this interesting time of COVID-19. And I've been here practicing law for about 15 years.
Thank you, Matt.
My name is Matt Burgess. I work for Blue Sky Business Resources. I am a consultant for them. I have 20 years experience in real estate development, shopping centers, multifamily, hotels, and medical office have been my primary focuses. And so with Blue Sky Business Resources, we spend a lot of time working with clients on opportunities through investment. On my part and what I do, I help them through really any business needs that they have, any resources that we can provide through Blue Sky to help them along with their journey, whether it be any planning, preparation, helping them source funds for projects. So we spent a lot of time during this pandemic helping businesses with their loan process and just helping them get through these moments. So that's that.
Thank you. Cliff and then Greg.
Hi, my name is Cliff Forsgren. I'm with Mountain West Advisors. We are located in Murray, Utah. I've been working for the past 20 to 25 years with business owners on their personal and business planning, financial planning. In addition to working with them on that, we also manage a substantial amount of business or of assets under our management. When they have a liquidity event like selling their companies, they need somebody to keep an eye on the dollars, and that's one of the services we offer to them, as well as helping them prepare and get ready for the ownership transition.
Thank you, Greg.
Great. My name is Greg Summerhays. I'm the president of the South Valley Chamber. We represent companies large and small in all different industries all throughout the Wasatch Front, mainly focused in the Salt Lake County area, but have membership up in Davis County and Utah County as well. Grateful, just want to reiterate what Jeremy said, grateful for all the panelists who are joining us today. COVID-19 has affected different industries and different businesses in different ways. And so we appreciate all the experts joining us today to kind of give their perspective on how this is impacting the commercial real estate market. So thanks everybody for being a part of it.
Thank you. And then we'll, towards the end, we'll introduce David Stahl with Hillcrest Bank, and he'll give us a quick update on the CARES Act. So moving into this, we'll take a brief minute with each one of the panelists. They've spoken with us about areas that they'd like to address, and we'll start with Dave for a quick 5 or 6 minutes. We'll move to Blake, and then Matt to give us a brief update on real estate as they see it. Go ahead, Dave.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. If I can share my screen, I'll put up a couple of slides to help me walk through this if I can. If not, we can just talk, but it's...
Can you see
Oh,
this
now,
button?
yep, now I can now. Do you see this okay?
Yep.
Okay. So I want to just provide a quick macroeconomic look and then maybe dive into a conversation about how it's impacting commercial real estate. So as you all know, we are in a recession. Q1 GDP in the US contracted by 4.8%. But the big hit, as we all know, will be in Q2. And CBRE is projecting that it will be 42% down at its lowest point in Q2, which is record breaking. We do, I think, have to acknowledge the extraordinary amount of government stimulus, which always seems to be understated in economic forecasts. And so this should really drive substantial growth in Q3, which will work to restabilize the economy. And as well as pent-up demand during COVID, I think that will also help drive growth in Q3 and then growth in Q4. And so in terms of, you know, what the US economy will look like at the end of the year, I think we expect at CBRE that by Q4 we should see growth, which will bring us closer to being even, despite Q2, which will be ugly. So the house view at CBRE is a V-shaped recovery for the economy, but as it relates to commercial real estate recovery, you know, many people may call it a U-shaped recovery. We're talking about it in terms of a Nike swoosh, however you want to describe the shape of the curve. But it's really going to be different for each asset class and also, of course, geographic areas. So when we talk about recovery timeframes, I'm talking about leasing volumes, which has an impact on rates. And then, of course, vacancies fall, which will, again, push up values. So I want to take a sector-by-sector look at what will happen, we believe, in the real estate recovery. From an industrial standpoint, this has been remarkably resilient, and that has to do in large part to e-commerce, which was very strong and continues to be strong. That being said, industrial has seen now a decline in leasing activity nationwide, but we think that the recovery will be the fastest in industrial. And so we look at a 12-month recovery for the industrial markets. In Utah, you know, the construction was extremely strong pre-COVID. And despite that, though, we think that demand will keep up, and although vacancies will nudge up a little bit, they will still remain below the 5% target for, which is a very healthy level of fully utilized, fully stabilized and done. Office tends to be a good proxy for the commercial real estate sector at large because it typically reflects the employment market. We think that office will take a little bit longer to recover, 24 months. That will give office tenants and landlords time to figure out new protocols around managing office space, density, where before COVID, you know, we were seeing an intense focus around densification for employees, even down to metrics of 130, 140, 150 square feet per head. We do think that will halt, but we also think that office generally still has or had good fundamentals leading up to COVID, which will in turn mean a healthy recovery. But it will take some time for landlords and tenants to work through cleaning protocols, obviously re-entry back into the workplace, which you may talk a little bit about today, how to deal with common areas, et cetera. This graph here that you see shows that leasing activity really fell off in Q1 and will be even further in Q2 once that entire quarter data is available. The green line that you see is the renewal leasing activity as a share of signed leases. So the green bar, you can see leasing transactions are way down, and renewals are a greater percentage, which is an indicator that of kind of where the office leasing activity is right now. So I think maybe I'll pivot to retail quickly, and then I'll come back to maybe a little bit more of a forecast. But retail is obviously the hardest hit sector, especially in the food and beverage sector. And so we are projecting a 36-month recovery for retail. If nothing more than the fact that many retailers won't be coming back, especially again in food and beverage. Those spaces, those companies have to be restarted, reactivated, and so space will need to be absorbed. You know, many people talk about retail as being dead, and they have been talking about that for a long time. However, retailers are a very entrepreneurial bunch, and they will continually reinvent themselves. There's probably some pent-up demand that will help them. You know, people that aren't able to travel internationally right now, or that aren't planning foreign trips, vacations, you know, for example, will possibly could spend some of that money in the retail sector. And certainly e-commerce will be a sustained structural shift. But we do expect eventually brick and mortar retail to come back. The last sector probably to make a mention of is multifamily, which is probably in between office and industrial in terms of timing for recovery. So probably 18 months. As people begin to move about again, they'll be forming new families, households, looking to secure premises. And so we do expect that to come back fairly quickly. Rents have dropped on the national level as a whole. So I guess in summary, industrial has been probably the best performing area. Warehouse, distribution, data centers that support underlying e-commerce businesses, and then the worst performing retail and hospitality, hotels, senior housing also has struggled and probably will have to work out some difficulties in the days ahead. And maybe just before wrapping up, Jeremy, before handing it back, I'll just a comment about back to office. You know, we learn from past cycles, at least we try to. On the screen, you see what happened in the last two recessions. The first you see there is the dot-com era. The second is the great financial crisis and its impact on office rates. You can see that this is Salt Lake City. The dot-com was a deeper recession or drop in terms of rates than the great financial crisis. And so this can give you an idea as to what to expect in rates. We don't know, obviously, how far rates will drop this go around, but again, we do think in the office market within 24 months we'll be back to pre-COVID levels in terms of activity and rates. This is, in case you're interested, I pulled this as a comparison to another market just to highlight the difference between geographies. And this is San Francisco, which got hit much, much harder. And so really when we talk about recoveries, it's important to remember that every market operates independently, has different factors. And so, you know, many people have said, wondered if working from home is the new norm. And we certainly heard after 9/11 that people said they'd never occupy tall office buildings again, and then they did. So we think that office fundamentals are strong, and we believe that it will be important to an important part of the employee experience as we go forward. So maybe with that, I'll pause, Jeremy, and hand it back to you.
Yeah, maybe I could jump in here. Dave, we have a question just saying, that was more of a financial cycle breakdown and this is a pandemic. So wondering if you think that this is going to be, different from that and maybe how so?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, in many respects, the curves and the trends we're seeing reflect much more of a natural disaster like Hurricane Katrina, for example, instead of a financial crisis. And you see that, especially if you look at jobless claim data, you see really, really steep increases in jobless claims, whereas a great financial crisis, it was much more modest increases over a much longer period of time. So that could lead to what we think would be a V-shaped economic recovery, as opposed to what ended up being a much wider recovery over a much longer period of time after the great financial crisis.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that a ton. Blake, if you'll take a few minutes from a legal's perspective on what you're seeing.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks, Jeremy. I'd like to just talk for a moment about what we're experiencing in working through some lease renegotiations. Starting in early April, our clients, many of whom are landlords, as well as a few tenants that we represent, began corresponding with one another in regards to requests for rent abatement and other relief in light of what's the coronavirus pandemic. And these discussions have, as I mentioned, started in early April and have continued through the month of April and are happening as we speak. My days are full of answering emails and talking to both landlords and tenants as to how to work through some of these issues. Primarily, we're seeing this in the retail sector with brick and mortar stores that are by order or directive closed for business and now just starting to reopen. What we're seeing, and every situation is a little different and unique, but what we're seeing as sort of a theme in these discussions and between the landlords and the tenants are as follows. Rent deferral as opposed to a rent holiday or abatement for a period of time, usually somewhere in the 3 to 4 to 5 month range. Usually that deferral is a percentage of what the tenant would make as a monthly rent payment, as opposed to a full abatement. So maybe 30% or 40% in that range, maybe up to 50%, not a full rent abatement. And then with a deferral repayment period upon the expiration of that deferral period for a period of 6 to 8 to even up to 18 months. So the key themes are rent deferral as opposed to rent abatement, and rent repayment over some window of time. The negotiated issues sometimes have become whether interest would accrue on the amount of rent that's been deferred. In addition, there are many landlords who are taking advantage of the request for a deferral to address other parts of the lease that could become problematic to those landlords. For instance, co-tenancy rights, where a tenant would have the right to abate rent if a large tenant within the center shuts down or does not continue to occupy the space that they previously occupied. Landlords are trying to negotiate out those existing co-tenancy provisions from leases as consideration for agreeing to a rent deferral. We're seeing smaller tenants get bullied by the larger landlords and vice versa. We're seeing many small landlords being bullied by their national tenants who have taken some fairly strong positions in terms of not making rent payments or dealing with their their leases in ways that may not reflect the economic realities that they're experiencing. I think it's been reported in the news the position the Cheesecake Factory, for instance, has taken. One of the challenges with the landlords in accepting rent modifications or rent deferrals is their own obligation to make their mortgage payments. So I wanted to just spend a minute talking about the negotiations that I'm seeing between mortgage lenders and their borrowers, these landlords. We're seeing a lot of cooperation amongst many lenders who are allowing principal payment deferrals for even up to 6 months and more, and in exchange for continuing to make interest payments. And so, similar to the rent deferrals, these mortgage payment deferrals are the way that the lenders at this point have dealt with these problems that their borrowers, the landlords, are having. With that being said, there are many different types of mortgage loans in the market that are very difficult to renegotiate, including CMBS loans, for instance, where the loan servicing company has no authority to negotiate with the borrowers for payment deferrals. So that's creating problems with many of the landlords as they try to accept lower rents from their struggling tenants on the one hand and maintain their debt service requirements on the other hand. When a lender and a borrower have been able to reach an agreement on a mortgage payment deferral, the lenders have typically required their borrowers to release and waive any and all claims, and that's fairly standard in the market to see. Many of them will require small loan fees to be paid in connection with this deferral, and as is typical, the repayment of legal fees and expenses that the lender will incur in working through that loan renegotiation. Jeremy, I may stop there.
All right, thank you, Blake. Matt, if you could take a few minutes and talk a little bit about what you see from a broader development standpoint, what some investors, how they may be shifting their funds or their interests given some of the downturns that we've seen in hospitality and other areas. If you could take a few minutes and talk about that.
Absolutely. Well, what the other two gentlemen have said, a lot of that rings true. I've had the pleasure of working with several developers and investors on both sides of the fence the last several months during this. I think there was once this hit, I mean, I think it took several weeks, reality setting in. It just seemed like there was a lot of unfortunately blood on the streets with in a lot of the minds of developers and investors both. Now that they're all breathing a little easier, I mean, a lot of them have taken advantage, as the last gentleman spoke about, on the deferrals, and taking advantage of PPP, and those things have helped out tremendously. But they're also in the reality of that it can give them a false sense of security, moving forward. What I'm seeing right now with developers that are in the hotel and multifamily business. So I was with a developer yesterday that has, the last several years, has been more focused on hotels than multifamily. So with these events that are going on, they pulled back. They're still, finishing up the hotels that they have currently, but they're not killing their rates necessarily. But they're, one hotel, it was running at a 5% occupancy average last week. So it is obviously not a good situation for hotels, but they are getting some relief. I think they were able to capture a couple $2 million in PPP, which also raises a concern about the auditing process that the government will be implementing here shortly on those guys. So they're facing a lot of challenges. But what I'm seeing is they're, as David said earlier, in the entrepreneurial spirit, what we're seeing is that these guys are switching back up to their multifamily projects, maybe some projects that they bought some real estate on, had preliminary plans. Because at the end of the day, the projects that they currently have are all non-recourse debt, long-term loans. They are, fortunately, we're not seeing much in the way of people not paying their rent on the multifamily side. A developer told me yesterday, he said, it's crazy because unemployment is down so much, but many of these folks are making more money sitting at home than they are going to work. And they're actually angry that they're having to go back to work. So their rent is actually look better than ever. So I'm seeing everybody switching that I'm talking to is the hotels are on the back end, but they understand that the pendulum's going to swing the other way. People are going to be getting out. Like you said, international travel is going to be down. So they are prepared. They went from, typical 40 to 50 employees per hotel down to 5 to 10 employees per hotel. And they're ramping those back up in the hiring process. So hopefully that'll drive some jobs to that market. But they are expecting that to swing back the other way. But for future development purposes, I think they're not focused on that right now. They understand it's going to swing back. There could be travel. I mean, rates are terrible right now, but they're going to swing back the other way. And what I'm seeing is that as these swing back the other way, that they're going to be more focused on just managing what they have in that department and focusing on the multifamily side of things. It seems to be that multifamily rents are down, and they are going to, I guess the best way to say this is underwriting is going to look a whole lot different over the next several months. I looked at a project yesterday in Montana, and for a 1-bedroom apartment that will be open in the next few months, there's $1,500 a month. So what they're looking at on the underwriting side of that, they understand those rates are going to drop significantly. Eventually it's going to swing back the other way. Like I think everything's going to, I say everything in this realm. So the underwriting is going to look a lot different from that. From the investor standpoint, it went really quiet for a few weeks, and now we're seeing a lot of investors getting really excited again about multifamily. I mean, they have been excited about it, but we're seeing where some of these developers understand because of the circumstances. We could go back to a few years ago where the internal rate of return is going to look a little bit better. They're going to have to sweeten these deals up a little bit to get the investors to put money in. But on these private placement deals, it seems like investors are getting really excited about it. I've had several conversations about investors, really focused on that right now. As we're talking about with retail, it's taken an absolute beating. There's still small shop is moving. I was just talking earlier about Starbucks. They're still moving forward. I haven't really watched them kill any deals recently. I am watching on the developer side now projects that were getting ready to take off. They're stepping back and they're reevaluating any of their TIF or SID, Community Improvement District funds. They're reevaluating those right now to see if the deals make sense moving forward. So there's quite a bit in that world that's going on as well. Something that I think is really exciting during these times, as we saw in 2008, as certain parts of retail die, new ones begin. And so reposition opportunities and redevelopment opportunities for developers are going to be really exciting times moving forward. So as a developer, I think that's important to pay attention to. Over the next, I'd say 24 months, opportunities are going to open up on that end. So I know I said several things and kind of jumped around there, but I really do believe that developers and investors right now, with all of this that is going on, and as hard as it has been on families and homes and businesses right now, I firmly believe that these are going to be the most exciting times that we're going to see over the next 24 months. I think new opportunities are going to open up. I think you're going to see people in the game that have not really been in the game are going to come out, and we're going to see some neat opportunities. I don't know about how much money, profitability is, are we going to be setting new records? I'm not sure about that, but I think it's going to be interesting times on what we have going on.
Maybe I can jump in here with just a question. I think, Blake, this one probably goes to you, but it just talks about what are the options a landlord has if all tenants in a multifamily decide to hold back on rents and refuse to pay those, and maybe the same thing with regards to shop tenants or retail stores in a commercial project.
Yeah, I mean, that's the fear. Appreciate that, Greg. That's the fear of many of my landlord clients right now. They are reliant upon their rights under their leases clearly would allow them enforcement action opportunities. Some of the courts have shut down currently. Some of the courts have suspended hearing eviction cases. The state of Utah has a directive that's limiting the amount of, or that's limiting eviction actions against at least residential tenants, though that's a fairly narrow directive. But the risk is that you evict all of your tenants that previously were paying rent. Now you don't have ability to replace them with new tenants that will pay, and that solves the problem. So I think these landlords are quite nervous right now. And in May, now that we're at the beginning of May, I think the real test will begin, especially for the residential landlords. Many of my residential landlords, multifamily owners, were quite close to their historic averages of rent payments for April, and that's because most employees were paid March wages, and they're much more worried now about what's happening so far in May, and so that is a concern. I think the result will come out pretty quickly. I think, again, the lenders are showing some patience. At least the lenders who have the ability to be patient are going to show some patience for them, and we'll work with them. I think that there are CARES Act opportunities for landlords as well that they're taking advantage of as fast as they can to reduce their employment wage burden and so forth. But I think that's certainly on their mind. What if all of my tenants stop paying rent?
Thank you for that, Blake. Maybe Dave, what are a few practical points of tenants that are planning to reoccupy their workplace to make it safe for them? And what are there some HR or other issues that you've seen that people should be considering as they're moving into that, as well as just general safety for their employees?
Sure. This is obviously a big topic right now, and a lot is being said about this, and a lot of very capable people are giving good advice on this. And I think first and foremost, it needs to be done within the guidelines of the local community and state governments. And so that now that we know, many more businesses can be open now in Utah as of the beginning of May than in April. That's going to allow many to start more quickly pivoting back towards reoccupancy. And many of you on the call may already have reoccupied. Things that we're thinking about at CBRE, planning ahead and starting early, giving employees the confidence that their safety is going to be protected, as well as customers that you have coming into the space. And that goes beyond just making sure that they are safe. It actually is really important that they perceive that they're safe. And that is everything from seeing signage in the space that you occupy that makes sure people know that you are thinking about safety, whether that's traffic patterns, maybe updated cleaning protocols. It could be changing your janitorial service to having it done during business hours as opposed to just in the evenings. If nothing more, just to give that, again, that perception and the optics around employee, visitor, and customer safety. And so, you know, there may be additional steps that you take in terms of screening of employees or people that are coming into the space, reopening safe environments first, such as you know, desks and places where you can keep social distancing, and you may choose to keep conference rooms closed until later on in a later phase of the reentry. And so I think just engaging all of your people, engaging your landlord if you're a tenant, or if you're a landlord, engaging your tenants and making sure that there is good communication, a good plan, making sure that you're able to plan ahead and not reoccupy until you have adequate supplies, which may take a while to get the masks, the gloves, the sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, etc. Those are all probably just some things that we're thinking about.
Dave, do you see that as like a shared responsibility between the tenant and the landlord, or does most of the responsibility fall on the tenant to provide those things?
Good question, Greg. Landlords and tenants in leases both have specific duties that they're obligated to. And so I think one of the very first things that ought to be done is for either side is to make sure that they're reading that lease and understanding what obligations each party has. And so it will be a shared conversation. So if we're talking about an office building with an elevator, you know, a lobby, parking elevator, stairwells, those common areas are likely going to be the responsibility of the landlord to make sure that they're cleaned properly and that adequate signage is up and that people feel safe. A lot of, you know, the space that the tenant occupies in their space, you know, if they have their janitorial service that they control, or whether that's a landlord provided service, that probably just depends on the lease and the building, but very much a shared responsibility, and tenants and landlords ought to be talking about it.
Blake, maybe we can jump back to you too. It sounds like you have a comment on this, so let me ask my question. You can comment on both, but I just wonder if you could touch on Senate Bill 3007 too, and just let people kind of understand what that means as far as protecting landlords.
Thank you. I think it's a unique bill that was recently adopted here in Utah within the last few weeks in a special session. Senate Bill 3007 is meant to provide immunity to owners and operators of real estate that may be up, you know, from office users to retail tenants, retail operators. It provides immunity against COVID-19 related claims that may be asserted by customers or employees against the operators. And the concern that was trying to be addressed in that bill was the risk of a plaintiff's action being filed against the operator, that the operator failed to properly maintain the premises in a way that would avoid the infection of the invitee of the coronavirus infection. And that bill is quite controversial in that it the opponents of it felt like it was solving a problem that didn't exist. The claim would have been weak, number one, by a plaintiff's attorney that filed that kind of a claim against the landlord or the tenant operator. And number two, that it was a sort of if it wasn't a weak claim, then it was a get out of jail free card for the operators, for the defendant in this type of an action. And I think that the compromise was, well, if the operator is acting in a reckless or engaged in willful misconduct, basically not adhering to at least basic levels of compliance with the directives from the local or state or federal governments, then then that claim could continue forward in the courts. But it will remain to be seen. I think the proponents of the bill were hoping that this would just provide some additional reassurance to the operators that they could open business back up when the state governments, the federal government, directed them to be able to do so. So it's trying to give some reassurance.
Thanks, Blake. Oops. So in addition to that, could you, any of the panelists, could you talk a little bit about co-working spaces and how they're faring currently and how you expect them to fare in the future?
I'm happy to respond. Feel free to jump in, but co-working is an interesting one, and it was attracting a lot of the press leading up to COVID as a disruptor of commercial real estate and particularly office. Obviously has some significant challenges with respect to safety and giving employees and users the perception that they can be safe. It's interesting in the psyche of employees, oftentimes they feel safer with their own community, their own employee base, their colleagues, than maybe having it be a shared environment with many different companies, just because they feel less control. That being said, I think it's probably fair to say that many operating co-working operators have seen lower membership or utilization in the past month, because as freelancers or startups have been looking at ways to shed costs, that's probably been one of the ways that they've done so, and just gone back at working from home, as many of us are as well. And so I think in the near term, it'll present some serious challenges for co-working operators. In long term though, there's still employers that want flexibility, and co-working certainly provides that for them. I was on a call recently with the CEO of Kiln, who's a local co-working company, very successful company here in Utah, and they're of the opinion that it will continue to be that companies will continue to want flexibility, especially now or in the near to midterm, as they try to figure out density requirements and how much their office will get used by employees versus working from home, and that could lead to maybe a rebound in co-working. So much remains to be seen, I think, in the co-working world.
Blake, I think this one comes back to you too. This is an interesting thought here, but what if one business, their employees cause another business to become contaminated and that business needs to shut down? What's the liability there?
Yeah, I think that this Senate Bill 3007 is intending to address that circumstance, if I understand the question. It's effectively creating immunity to a business that is claimed to have created the contamination in whatever way that occurs. I think that even a creative plaintiff's lawyer who is attempting to get around this, the immunity granted by this statute, is going to have a very difficult burden of proof to establish the duty and the cause and effect of that of the defendant in that action, of the employer who is claimed, or the business who's claimed to have created that infection to the other business. So I think it's, as we all know, plaintiffs' lawyers are creative, or lawyers in general are creative by nature. But I think it's going to be a long shot, frankly, for a plaintiff's bar to penetrate around this Senate Bill 3007 in Utah, and then just the normal tort duty and cause requirements that they have to do outside of Utah.
And then Blake, if you'll stay on and just address real quick force majeure provisions and how they're being handled currently and what they're looking like in the future for different.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be glad to. It's very interesting to me over the last month. These were provisions in a contract, as all of you may know, that are intended to address circumstances that are outside of the control of the contracting parties, and effectively grant additional time or excuse performance of contractual obligations for due to causes that are outside of the party's control. They are usually defined in terms of acts of God or shortage of labor or riots or government requirements. Very generic language. And frankly, I think both sides of the contract have largely ignored the detail within those force majeure provisions for years and years and years. Obviously, this situation has changed that dramatically. We are looking at those provisions as close as any provision in our contracts right now as we negotiate for our clients. You'll find those provisions in almost every different type of contract. Leases certainly have them. Mortgage loans have them. Construction contracts have them, et cetera, et cetera. And so right now, we're seeing a lot of time and attention paid to them. Banks, as you can imagine, are unwilling to bend on these force majeure clauses. They demand that in a construction loan, that the construction project be completed on the completion date or within a very short amount of time after that. And they're not willing to bend on giving their borrowers, at least by contract, by their loan documents, additional flexibility in light of these current circumstances. Tenants, on the other hand, are also requiring or requesting some interesting modifications to their force majeure provisions. And the larger tenants with leverage as they negotiate with their landlords are getting some additional protections that I've never seen before. Like, for instance, if they will demonstrate lost sales revenues due to government orders over a period of weeks, then their rent will abate by, some percentage of what it should be. So, it's time to take a closer look, I think, at our force majeure provisions, particularly in light of some fear that there may be, down the road, some additional stay-home orders that will impact, especially those retailers.
Thank you, Blake. Cliff, if you could take a minute and address all of these thoughts in relation to Blue Sky, and in general, how is this all affecting people's portfolios moving forward, and what are some of your suggestions?
Well, it's been interesting listening here. We're sitting across the table from many of our clients who are business owners who may be renting space for their business. They may own space that they're renting to others. In addition to that, they have to deal with the issues of surrounding their own business as it relates to the current conditions. And many of them are sitting on a retirement account. So a number of pieces of the puzzle, and in every case that has been mentioned today, I mean, we've got one or more people who have that issue relative to their overall financial portfolio. I do concur with something David said, and Matt alluded to it. Our clients are entrepreneurs, and never underestimate the ingenuity and the just determination and drive of an entrepreneur. I think we're going to see solutions that we haven't thought of before. I suspect people are going to come up with ways to deal with this that maybe we haven't considered. Relative to what we're seeing with our clients, one of them is that most of them wish they had prepared better. You've got a business owner who's sitting on top of this, the kind of issues we talked about. They're paying rent. He's got people paying rent to him, and he looks across the room, and he's got a business partner who's diabetic. And the question comes up, all right, there's a real possibility, whether it be from COVID or something else, but COVID has raised the issue, that I could lose him. What's going to happen to the business if that happens? We've got an employee over there who's taking care of some of our biggest customers. And he's overweight and has had some heart problems. That could impact us. So I think what it comes down to now in what we're seeing is everybody, how do we hang in there and how do we preserve the value of what we have in the meantime? And what do we do to rebuild it? I was glad to hear some of the things that David said relative to how long they think the real estate market might take to recover, because I think that it's quicker than some of my clients are anticipating, and I hope you're right. They hope you're right. So it was interesting to me that the issues that were addressed today, many of them have applications at one form or another in a lot of industries that we're working with. As far as the market goes, the stock market, where your retirement accounts are parked, I'm gonna quote the great philosopher Yogi Berra, who once made the observation that making predictions is difficult, especially about the future. The market will rebound. It always has. What we don't know at this point, we can only guess. What we don't know is what segment's going to rebound first, and which are going to take more time, and when might that start. So most of our clients are optimistic. Agriculture, we've got some in agriculture. They're just not sure. I think of all of the people we work with, those are the ones who have the biggest question mark in their minds. It's been interesting also. We've got some clients in the medical profession are just wondering what's going to happen, what's going to come out of this. I mean, every night the only thing we hear on the news is about people getting sick and dying. But if you don't happen to be one of those people working with those who are sick and dying, you don't have a job. And there's some questions about how the medical and dental business models may change as a result of this. So I think while we've been talking about real estate, I think many of the overall issues that have been talked about today, you can move to other industries as well. real estate and retail, excuse me, in terms of what we're talking about. So I think going forward, our people, our clients are looking at, all right, how do I preserve what I've got and rebuild it when this whole thing's over? And I want to just close with thanking Jeremy. Ever since barbershops opened, my wife has been on me to get a haircut, and he said I look pretty good. So I'm gonna pass that on to her. I don't know that you'll have a lot of credibility on that issue, but at least I can pass it on. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cliff. I've got a diverse background. I can guarantee you my credibility as far as haircuts is impeccable. With that being said, we're short on time. Troy, if you'll just take a quick minute and update us. I know that you've got some good news towards the Elevate conference, the keynote speaker, as well as a special guest speaker. And if you could then turn it over to David Stahl. I know that he could update us a little bit about the CARES Act and the PPP loan. And then with that, we'll say goodbye to everybody. And I'll take just a minute now to thank all the panelists. I think it's been incredibly informative, and I think the people on the call have hopefully enjoyed and have been able to gain a little bit of hope moving forward towards what we're facing. Again, thanks everybody, and Troy, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it. I think it was a very educational and enlightening conversation today. I appreciate the information you guys shared. On the Elevate conference, which is May 28th, it's a half-day event, and there's 3 hours of CE available for financial advisors, CPAs, lawyers, and insurance people, I believe. So we did confirm Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox. He is going to be highlighting our governor's panel. That'll be great. We're reaching out and waiting to hear back from a couple of other high-powered individuals we haven't heard back from yet. We'll send out updates on that as soon as we make them available. We did fill the business panel today. So we've got 2 companies that actually pivoted and turned around and are doing great. And we've got another company that has kind of struggled, but they're going to talk about how they struggled through it and how they're poised for success in the future. With that, I really want to turn it over to David Stahl real quick. David, give us an update on the CARES Act and the PPP. And for everybody else, please register and attend the Elevate conference on May 28th. It's going to be a great day. David?
Sure. Thanks, Troy. Thanks, Jeremy and the South Valley Chamber for helping promote this and giving us the opportunity to provide a quick update on the CARES Act, specifically to the PPP. I hate doing this, but I will read this because a couple of changes that have been highlighted and have been coming out over the last few days. First off, as of now, there are still loan funds available. So that's a good thing. They've not run out of the second round of funding yet. Many of you have probably seen the deadline for public companies and private equity-backed companies who can access liquidity, whether it's through a fund or through capital markets. That was a big highlight from the first round of funding. A lot of very well-known names received access to the funds, and we received a bunch of scrutiny for that. I was on a call yesterday where there was a deadline of May 7th to give them privacy and reprieve, Safe Harbor Act, to refund those fees, those funds if they wanted to. They've now pushed that back to the 14th. So now companies who want to repay those have until the 14th to do that. And if anybody knows somebody or is one of those folks, just reach out to your bank and they should have a process or a protocol for that. There was another change in the interim final rule yesterday. SBA published its latest set of facts, FAQs, and it has the potential to adversely impact forgiveness calculations for many small businesses that rely on part-time student labor, like fast food restaurants, entertainment businesses, and those in those industry sectors. There is a detailed, if you fall into that category, there is a detailed list of sort of the impacts there, and how to calculate part-time labor, student labor, et cetera, and how to account for those in your forgiveness application. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Sorry, it's a half a page, so I don't want to read it right now. And then the third biggest update
is really the National Association of Government Guaranteed Lenders is hosting their virtual conference right now for the next couple of days, and our SBA team is attending that, and they anticipate learning a great deal about the loan forgiveness process and how that will take shape over the coming weeks. And so I would envision that many of these webinars and other informative outlets will have a great bit more of information over the next couple of days into next week as we begin to continue to get information and digest the latest from the SBA and the Treasury around this program. So those are my updates today, Troy and Jeremy. So I'm happy to take any questions after the meeting or in the chat feature, but I'll turn it back over to you guys as we wrap up.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to sign off, and anybody else is welcome to. Also, Troy, thank you. This has been great. All our panelists, thank you so much for bringing the expertise to us. We look towards those people who are in the specific professions to help everybody else, and you've done a great job at that. With that, thank you all, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Have a great day. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.